The lights in the grand hall died all at once, and I knew before anyone screamed that we were finished pretending this was a normal night. My name is Daniel Ashcroft, and 3 months ago I was a joke standing in the corner of a throne room, wearing a uniform that didn't fit and a title nobody respected. Tonight, that joke was the only thing standing between the queen of the Velari Empire and a blade meant for her throat. Let me back up. When Queen Elira Vec took the throne, the nobles of her court wanted her surrounded by warriors bred for war, 7 feet tall, plated skin, muscles like cables under armor. Instead, during a banquet meant to humiliate the human delegation, she pointed at me, a former security officer nobody back home even remembered, and said I would be her personal guard. The room laughed. I remember the sound of it, sharp and cruel, echoing off marble walls taller than any building I'd grown up near. She wasn't laughing, though. Her eyes were flat, calculating, the eyes of someone who enjoyed watching her rivals squirm more than she cared about the insult she was throwing at me. I could have walked away. Instead, I said yes. I won't pretend the months after that were easy. The Velari guards trained like their bodies could shrug off anything, and in a way they could. I sparred against soldiers named Kalen and Torvan, warriors who had spent lifetimes learning formal combat styles passed down through their military houses. They fought with honor, structured strikes, clean footwork, rules about when you could strike and when you couldn't. I didn't have any of that. What I had was stubbornness and a habit of getting back up when I should have stayed down. The queen barely spoke to me during that time. She would toss out an order, watch to see if I'd fumble it, then look away like she'd already lost interest. I heard her call me her little pet experiment once, to a room full of nobles who nodded along. I kept my mouth shut and did my job anyway. There were whispers, though, quiet ones, about a faction inside the Empire that didn't want Elira on the throne. A disgraced general named Dreeth Salyun, exiled after her coronation, was rumored to still have loyalists inside the palace walls. Nobody took it seriously. The Velari had ruled with the same rigid warrior code for 1,000 years. Nobody imagined an attack on the palace itself, not during a public ceremony, not with half the Empire's noble houses in the room. That confidence turned out to be the biggest mistake anyone in that hall ever made. The banquet that night was meant to celebrate the anniversary of Elira's crowning. Long tables, music that sounded like wind moving through glass pipes, nobles in ceremonial robes trading polite insults over food I still couldn't pronounce the names of. I stood near the dais, close enough to see the queen's shoulders relax slightly whenever she thought no one was watching her. Then the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a power surge. Every light in that massive hall died in the same instant, and in the dark that followed I heard something the Velari almost never made in public, the sound of real fear. I moved before I even finished thinking. Years of training kicked in, the kind that doesn't ask permission from your brain, it just happens. I grabbed the queen's arm and pulled her down behind the raised dais, ignoring the surprised sound she made. Emergency lighting kicked on seconds later, dim red strips along the floor, just enough to see shapes moving. And the shapes moving were not friendly. They came from 3 directions, wearing dark wraps that hid their faces, and they didn't fight the way Velari warriors fought. No formal stances, no warnings, no rules. They struck fast and aimed for whoever was weakest first, which meant the ceremonial guards standing near the doors. Warriors trained their whole lives for honorable combat and completely unprepared for an enemy who had no interest in being honorable. I watched Kalen, a guard twice my size who could probably lift a car over his head, hesitate for half a second when an attacker came at him without announcing an opening strike the way tradition demanded. That hesitation cost him. He went down hard, and I didn't have time to check if he'd get back up. The queen grabbed my arm. Her voice came out steadier than I expected. "This way. There's a passage behind the dais." We ran. Behind us, the hall dissolved into chaos, screams and the clatter of overturned tables, and somewhere in that noise, Dreeth Salyun's voice rang out, calm and satisfied, announcing that the throne would finally return to proper hands. The passage behind the dais led to a narrow servant corridor, stone walls with faded murals, barely lit by the emergency strips. I heard footsteps behind us almost immediately, fast ones. "How many are with you?" the Queen asked, and I realized she meant guards backup, some plan I was supposed to already have. "Just me," I said. She looked at me the way she used to look at me in the throne room, except this time there wasn't any mockery in it, just a flicker of something closer to panic. "Then we need a plan that doesn't rely on numbers," I said, and pulled her down another corridor before she could argue. I knew this section of the palace because I'd walked it 100 times during patrols nobody thought mattered. There was a storage room ahead, narrow, single entrance, shelves stacked with ceremonial armor nobody used anymore. Not a great hiding spot, a perfect choke point. I pushed her inside and turned to face the corridor just as two attackers rounded the corner. They were fast, faster than Kaelin or Torvund, trained differently, trained to kill quickly and disappear. One carried a curved blade. The other had some kind of stun weapon, humming with a faint blue light. I didn't have a weapon built for their kind of fighting, but I had knowledge they didn't expect me to have. Velari warriors, even ones trained to ignore tradition, still carried habits bred into them from childhood. They expected an opponent to either stand and trade blows or run. They didn't expect someone to fight dirty. I grabbed a shelf of old ceremonial armor and shoved it into the path of the first attacker, buying half a second, then closed the distance instead of backing away, which is the opposite of what their instincts told them a smaller opponent would do. The stun weapon caught my shoulder before I closed the gap, and pain shot down my arm like fire, but I kept moving. I'd been hit harder in worse places for worse reasons back home, and stopping wasn't an option with the Queen standing behind me in a room with one exit. I got close enough to knock the stun weapon from the second attacker's grip, using my whole body weight instead of trying to match strength I didn't have. The first attacker recovered from the shelf and came at me with the blade. And I did something no Velari warrior would ever consider doing in a fight. I dropped to the ground entirely, rolled beneath the strike, and came up inside his guard where the blade couldn't reach me properly. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't honorable, it worked. Between the two of them, I managed to disable the weapons and put both attackers on the ground before either finished me off, though by the end my shoulder felt like it belonged to someone else, and I was fairly sure I'd cracked a rib somewhere along the way. I didn't have time to celebrate. Dreeth Salyun himself appeared at the end of the corridor a moment later, flanked by two more of his people, and his expression when he saw me standing between him and the Queen was somewhere between confusion and disbelief. "You're the joke," he said, "the one she picked to embarrass the human delegation." "Guess the joke's still standing," I said, though my voice came out rougher than I wanted. He didn't waste more words. He came at me directly, confident, moving with the kind of trained precision that made Kaelin and Torvund look clumsy by comparison. I couldn't match his speed or his strength, not even close, and both of us knew it. So I didn't try to match it. I let him get close, closer than instinct screamed at me to allow, and when his strike came, I twisted just enough that it grazed past me instead of landing clean, and used the opening to drive my elbow into a spot along his side that I'd learned, months earlier, was less protected by Velari armor design than warriors like to admit. He staggered just for a second, but a second was enough. I heard footsteps behind him, real palace guards this time, alerted by the noise and finally cutting through the chaos in the main hall. Dreeth Salyun heard them too, and something in his posture shifted from confidence to calculation, weighing whether finishing me off was worth the seconds it would cost him. He chose to run instead. The guards swept past me, chasing him down the corridor, and I finally let myself lean against the wall, breathing hard, shoulder throbbing, entire body aware of every bad decision I'd made in the last 10 minutes. The Queen stepped out from the storage room slowly, staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You should be dead several times over," she said. "Would have been rude to die in front of you," I said, which probably wasn't the smartest thing to say to an empress, but I was too tired to filter myself properly. She didn't laugh. She looked at the two attackers still on the ground, then down the corridor where the guards had vanished chasing Salyun, then back at me. "My warriors are trained to fight with honor," she said quietly. "Tonight that almost got me killed." "Your warriors are strong," I said. "They just never had to be unpredictable before." She studied me for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes that hadn't been there in the throne room 3 months ago. "I chose you as an insult," she said. "I know. I'm not sure it was one anymore." The following morning, standing in that same throne room where the whole court had laughed at me, nobody laughed. The Queen stood before her nobles and formally named me her chosen shield, not as a joke this time, not as an insult aimed at anyone, but as a decision she meant. I still don't know if I belong in a palace built for warriors twice my size, but I know that when the lights went out and everything the Velari believed about honorable combat fell apart in an instant, it was the joke standing quietly in the corner who kept the Queen breathing until morning. And honestly, that's a punchline I can live with.